Welcome to AWAI's Great Books Club with your host, Marcella Allison.
Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to AWAI's Great Books Club call for November. I'm Marcella Allison, and my special guest for this month is Bob Bly, and we're going to be talking about a wonderful book by James Webb Young called A Technique for Producing Ideas, something we all need to know how to do in this business, that's for sure. I am so glad that Bob is joining us. Well, first, of course, I had to say to Bob that he wins the prize for picking the shortest book so far.
So everyone owes me just for that.
Oh, big time, big time. Although it's deceptive, right? Because you think, oh, I can just whale through this, and then you read it and you realize there is a lot packed into this little baby here. So I also have to say, Bob, I always enjoy listening to you at AWAI because I just think of you as being a walking encyclopedia of copywriting history and know-how, let alone entertaining while you give me the history, which is just makes it even better. So, of course, you picked a book that I didn't know about that's a classic. It was written in the 1930s and has tons of information on something I have to do every day, which is come up with big ideas. So I just wanted to thank you for being our guest and say I'm really looking forward to this call because I always get so much out of all of your presentations, but I'm especially looking forward to digging in to this little gem with you today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be doing with you, and I love this book.
Oh, good. So just a little bit about the book for those of you who don't know. This is by James Webb Young, and he was with J. Walter Thompson, which some of us recognize. And I love this little piece at the end, now largely forgotten. He was one of the great advertising men and mail-order marketers of the 20th century, famous for selling neckties hand-woven in New Mexico. And, of course, since the University of Chicago is my alma mater, I have to say I have a particular fondness for the fact that he taught at the University of Chicago School of Business, which I love. So you got 2 points from me for that one. Again, as I said, he was a vice president at J. Walter Thompson and Company, and this was a quote we just pulled from the book to kick us off, which I love. The habit of mind which leads to a search for relationships between facts becomes of the highest importance in the production of ideas. And we're going to talk a lot about this today, this idea of how do you connect two seemingly disseparate ideas. And Bob, I want to kick off by starting out with probably the most controversial concept in this book, and it's one that some people agree with and some people absolutely do not agree with. So I think we'll just kind of kick off our call here. Here's what Young says about ideas. He says, this has brought me to the conclusion that the production of ideas is just as definite a process as the production of Fords. That the production of ideas, too, runs on an assembly line, that in this production the mind follows an operative technique which can be learned and controlled, and that its effective use is just as much a matter of practice in the technique as is the effective use of any tool. So I have to jokingly say that my husband actually bought a brand new Ford panel van yesterday. So I have seen the production line of Fords, and I want to ask you, Bob, how do you really believe this? Do you really believe that coming up with ideas can be a process that can be sort of defined and locked down just in the way you would a factory assembly line, and that anyone can really use this process to come up with good ideas?
Whenever you write a book like this, a process, a method, the thing is, everyone's already using it. Young used it for decades before he wrote the book, and he didn't come up with this 5-step process until someone asked him to give a talk about how he came up with ideas, and he said, well, I better sit down and figure it out, and then he came up with the formula. But he didn't come up with the formula and then say, oh, from now on I'm going to use these 5 steps. He basically reverse engineered the formula. He said, what do I do And that's how we came up with this. So when we go into the formula, and most of the people listening to this know it because they read the book, they know the 5 steps, you must have recognized you do this already. It's just that you didn't know that these were the steps, and the benefit of having the formula and knowing it explicitly instead of doing it instinctively as you have been is this way you don't miss any of the steps, and you give each one the emphasis it deserves. But he didn't invent this. We were all doing it already.
That's great. It's sort of like the proof is in the pudding. It's not so much that he said, here's a way that I think will work to come up with ideas. You're right. He said, so how the heck is it that I come up with ideas? What is it that happens naturally that does this? And then how could I systematize that so that, as you say, I did it more deliberately? And we're going to get into these steps in just a minute. Again, he comes up with 5 steps. I call them 5 steps to train your mind to produce good ideas every time you need them. I think we've all seen this, especially in new writers, that's one of the biggest challenges, right? You're working for this client, and they say to you, I'm sure you've heard this a million times, Bob, I hear this all the time, we need a big idea for this package, or we need a big idea for this launch. And you're like, oh, sure, let me just go grab one of those off the grocery store shelf, and I'll bring that in to you. And it's this overwhelming panic sometimes at the beginning of, oh, my God, how am I going to come up with a big idea for this promotion? And that's what we're going to talk about on the call. But I wondered, Bob, if you just wanted to say a little bit about how I know this is, by now you're like a legend, but if you can think back to when you first began, do you remember what it felt like to have that, those operating instructions, like come up with a big idea for this, and then be thinking, oh my God?
Yeah, I mean, there's one of my favorite writers is of fiction, not of copy, is a guy named Harlan Ellison, and he has said, I know him, and he said to me, and also in his writings, he says, people always ask him, how do you come up with a great idea? He goes, oh, there's an idea service up in Schenectady, New York, and I subscribe to it, and they send me 7 ideas a month, and people actually believe him and ask him for the address of the idea service.
Oh, my God, I see an entrepreneurial opportunity right here.
Really, I just do, too. We should talk about this after the call. It really is.
Oh God,
I can't remember the first time, but I do remember that early in my career, I did come to the realization, which then my association with Mark Ford and Agora reinforced with me years later. But early I came up with the idea of whether I'm going to have a successful promotion depends largely on whether I had a fresh idea. I once had a client for whom I was unable to come up with a fresh idea, and I did some very good writing, and he said to me, kindly, he said, this is well written, but you're just basically shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. You know, you're not making, there's nothing new here. And he was right. So that's why I value this book so much. There's a couple of reasons I do, but that's one of them, because I believe you have a huge advantage in your effort to beat the client's control or just come up with a winner if they don't have one. If you can come up with you call it a big idea, I like to use the term a fresh idea, a compelling idea, something that is strong, unique, persuasive, and that the reader has not heard before.
I think that's brilliant. And, you know, it reminds me of something that David Deutsch said to me this week. He said, you know, the danger is you love to write. He was talking to me. He said, you love to write, and you're a really good writer, and that means you can make, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically dumb ideas sound good, or you know, you can write so well that it reads well, it seems great, and then I go, but wait a minute, she didn't say anything, or I really don't have anything fresh or new here. And I think that's key, because this is different from the actual craft of the writing. This is the bones, the skeleton that's going to hold up your writing. And if you don't have a good idea, no matter how well you're writing, it's exactly like you said, you're just arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about what is a fresh idea. And so this is his definition. This comes from page 16, and I'm using the little black paperback book for those of you playing with us at home. You may have different pages depending upon where your book came from, but it's short enough. I think you can find us. So here's the quote, which I love. He says, "In advertising, an idea results from a new combination of specific knowledge about products and people with general knowledge about life and events." And we're gonna talk more in depth about this. But what I wanted to ask you, Bob, is sort of implied in this is that actually there's no new idea. There's just new combinations of knowledge that already exists.
That's what he says, and I mean the prototypical obvious example of this is an old invention that was that they came up with when I was literally a teenager, the clock radio. You can't come up with a more obvious example of a combination of two ideas. Someone took a clock and a radio and combined them.
Right.
But he's right. People often say there is nothing new under the sun. I might modify that to say there's almost nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But most successful promotions, and we're going to look at some examples when we go through our case studies. You had a couple of great ones they're just they're combinations of existing ideas. Or another way to put it, they're a new. Here's what I used to say. It's very unlikely we're going to say new things. What we're going to end up saying is old things, but we have to say them in a new way.
That's a great example. I will never forget when I was at University of Chicago, and I was not studying advertising. I was studying English and anthropology, and I was taking a class in anthropology, and I discovered that there's this book, and I will not remember the name of it anymore, in which every story that's been told across all these cultures has been indexed. And what they did is they took each element of the story and they gave it a number. So it'd be like girl meets guy, that's number 1, Any part of a story that you could have, she dies, he dies, they fall in love, any combination. And so they had reduced sort of like all the stories in all the cultures all across the world to these little formulas, because basically that was the case. All these stories were involving the same things. They were just being told in a different location or in a different order. And it really struck me like that's true. That's what's making it new is the actual combination of the parts. But the parts themselves, girl meets boy, right? That's about as old and classic as you can get. That doesn't change no matter what culture you're telling that from.
Yeah, I agree. There was a guy or a gal teaching a course maybe a decade ago at the Learning Annex in New York University on screenwriting. I did not take it, but I remember in the catalog, she said there's 9 basic plots to movies, and you would learn them. And that's it, 9 different movies. And everybody's making a variation of those 9 movies.
Exactly. So what I want to talk about next is how do you come up with those variations that make it unique? How do we combine these elements? And the first step in these 5 steps is to gather raw material. And I want to ask you about this, Bob, because you said you picked this book because of its focus on research, in other words, the raw material, and that you said you believe this is one of the missing links that B writers need to really become an A writer. And I wondered if you could say more about that, about why this research, this gathering of raw materials is so critical to this process.
Well, cut me off if I get too long-winded, because I could give an hour at least webinar on this. But the basic, and I think it was Carleen Anglade Cole maybe at boot camp, or someone else who gave a talk, who said the biggest flaw she saw in beginning writers who were not hitting it over the fence was that they didn't have enough information about the product and about the market. And Hopkins, you list this as step 1. I really say this is step 1A and B. Step 1A is your first bullet, specific materials. You have to research the product and the prospect. What are the features and benefits of the product and its competitors? And then what is your market? You have to learn as much as you can about a market. Like I had a guy who said, it was to call me and says, I have to write a promotion selling something to pediatricians. And I said, well, how many pediatricians have you spoken with? He goes, what do you mean? I said, you never interviewed any pediatrician? Yeah. So I said, well, are you a pediatrician? Is your dad? He said, no. I said, then you don't know anything about how they think or what they care about.
Right, exactly.
So that's step A. And it has two parts, the product and the audience. And step B is general materials. Hopkins, if you guys remember, says in the book, he didn't know anybody in advertising who didn't have a voraciously curious mind about almost any subject. I have met only one copywriter who's a good copywriter, told me, and I'm not going to name him, but you know who he is if I said him, who said, I'm not much of a reader. Most copywriters I know are voracious absorbers of information. You know Don Houtman, who has spoken.
Right.
So when we would go to Don's apartment to discuss any subject, literally, if it was a group of 3 or 4 people, we didn't sit in the living room. We formed a circle around his photocopier, and as we were discussing topics, he would pull out of his files relevant articles and photocopy the article and hand it out to each of us, and you'd go home with a stack of material. That's how obsessed he was with raw material. And it was a big lesson that I learned from him. At first I didn't understand it, and then I embraced it.
That's amazing, and that ties to one of the next things I want to ask you, which is, and this I'm appealing to your mathematical brain here, right? So what I love is he says, the mathematical possibilities of such new combinations in the kaleidoscope are enormous, and the greater the number of pieces of glass in it, the greater becomes the possibility for new and striking combinations. So let me challenge you to say, Bob, how do you know when you have enough, right? Because, like, we could get stuck in research forever.
Well, I actually have, unfortunately, I don't think we can access it on our computers now because we are in this. But if people after this presentation go to my YouTube channel, Bob Bly YouTube channel, there's a presentation called The Exponential Curve of Excellence, and it answers this question. Because, yes, there's so much information, so much raw material out there that you get an assignment to write something about gold bullion, you could spend the next 5 months researching it, but your client can't afford to pay you 5 full months of your time, and they can't wait for the promotion that long. So this video will show you how much time you spend on research, on writing, whatever your task is, and basically the answer is whatever you think would be enough time, you want to go about 10 or 20% over that. If you double or triple it, you'll never get the job done. But but go a little further than you normally would, and you'll be going somewhat further than all your competitors, and you'll have the edge.
And that ties to something I wanted to ask you, which is, I would guess the other way to do this is, so for example, if I write on a similar topic, I begin to kind of self-select and notice more and more of those articles. So I've done a lot of copy on various toxins in the environment, and so I begin to notice articles or books, and I kind of can't help it. Part of it is because I'm trying to keep that copy alive, so I'm looking for new headlines and leads and things to put in it. But I'm forever pulling and clipping, and I kind of have a folder where I stick all that kind of information in. I have another one that sort of is any kind of food control, because I have a couple food controls for boardrooms, so I'm always looking for any just general information about food and healing that I'm coming across. But this is a question from one of our book club members on the Facebook page, and he says, on page 17, Young talks about indexing and cross-indexing the odd bits of material that Sherlock Holmes gathers, and here he's making a reference to the fictional character that is talked about in the book. And he says, so what is your process to feed your idea bucket and keep it organized? So, Bob, you spoke briefly about the research that you're doing on a specific project. So in your example of sitting around the photocopier with Don Houtman, how do you organize that sort of like myriad of kind of curious stuff that might turn out to be useful someday, but you're not sure where or how yet.
I don't have any special or revolutionary methods. I only have two. One is the oldest one in the book. I own probably more 4-drawer metal file cabinets with hanging Pendaflex files than anyone you know. I don't know how many, but it's got to be at least 10. And they are stuffed. Well, they're not stuffed, but they're pretty full. And I use hanging Pendaflex files on every topic. And whenever I encounter something online or in an article, a newspaper, if it's online, I print it. If it's in the newspaper, yes, I still read newspapers. I rip it out, and I put it in that folder. So when I get an assignment to work on something, like you mentioned toxins, I just had an assignment about GMOs, genetically modified organisms. And, I already had a file folder stuffed because I've worked on that before. That's one method. The other method, I don't know if you have kids of your own yet, but when you have kids and they play video games, there's a term called cheat. Do you know what that is?
I haven't heard the term.
Yeah, it's when there are books that give you codes that let you shortcut the rules and do things.
Right. So you can get to the next level faster or something. Right.
So my cheat, which may not be useful to Alan Stacey, is I do have a very good, and I'm just lucky about this, memory, so I can pull out of my memory facts, headlines, controls, leads, not photographically, but at will. So I have a lot that's in my head.
You have a very large brain filing system.
No, not a large brain, but I have parts of my memory. Memory is one aspect of intelligence. I don't think I'm that bright, but I have parts of my memory are very strong.
I love it. And what I've done is I use my swipe file to kind of trigger me to remember other things. So I sometimes use my swipe file as my tickle file, my reminder file for something I've read, because I'll kind of have a vague memory. I'll be like, oh, what was that thing? And the other thing is, because I work in a partnership, sometimes it means I call Lois and go, Lois, do you remember that promo where it said such and so? And she'll go, oh, yeah. And then we'll say, who's that from? And between the two of us, we can finally figure out where it's from or who wrote it or where we might have stored it, and that helps too. But I think those are both. I use the metal file cabinet system too. I have one that says, probiotics, one that says toxins, one that says, and anything I've ever worked on where I've gone deep, that then becomes a file folder that I start and keep, because when the project's over, there's a lot of materials I'm not going to keep from the project, but I do keep those research materials, and I find myself going back to them over and over again on multiple projects because they come up again and again, those key ideas. I want to go on to step 2 now, so I want to make sure before we go on to step 2, though, Bob, is there anything else you want to stress or say or just wrap up?
No, but do I have time? Do I have time for a quick James Webb Young story?
Absolutely.
One of his businesses that he bought an apple orchard in Washington State, and it was high up in the mountain. And he said the reason he did that is if you grow apples at very cold temperatures, they're crisper, they're sweeter, the taste is better. So anyway, and he had a mail-order fruit business before Harry and David sold pears mail-order, and he was very successful. And they got a lot of advance orders from their catalog. So one season, they had hailstorms in the mountain. It was so cold, and the hail pockmarked the apples. And when you pockmark, you expose the flesh to the oxygen, and you know what happens when you do that. It turns brown.
That little brown spot.
Yeah,
right?
It looks ugly. So he said, what are we going to do? We're going to have to return all these orders and throw them out. So instead, he wrote the best piece of copy he ever wrote, and he printed it on a little card that he inserted when he shipped the apples. And it said, note the pockmarks on these apples. These are proof. These are from sudden hailstorms, which are proof that they are growing at high mountain altitudes where it's extremely cold. And then he said, and the cold locks in the sugars and the juices and makes them taste better.
I love it.
So here's the end of the story. He said he did not get, and this is what he says, one single order returned, but next year from their catalogs, people hand wrote on the order forms, pockmarked apples if available, otherwise the plain signs.
Oh my God, I love it. Talk about taking a new combination of two ideas and coming up with something completely different, right? And flipping it to the benefit.
It's one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard in marketing.
It's absolutely brilliant. You see how the man was an idea machine, right? Like anyone else would have given up before that. I love that story. That's perfect. So I want to go on to step 2 here because I want to watch our time, and I want to make sure we get to our specific examples after we move through the steps here. So step 2 is mental digestion. What you are seeking now is the relationship, a synthesis where everything will come together in a neat combination like a jigsaw puzzle. And then I want to move on, and I'm going to come back to this in just a second. I want to go to step 3 because these kind of seamlessly go into each other. So step 3 is you turn the problem over to your unconscious mind and let it work while you sleep. Drop the problems completely and turn to whatever stimulates your imagination and emotions. So what happens is you've gathered all this research, then you're going to actively try to digest it, you're going to play with the pieces, and then you're going to step away from it. And so we have a question, which I'm going to go ahead and bring up now as we're going through these two, Bob. So we have a question from a book club member that says, what are your favorite ways when you hit that third stage to get the digestive juices flowing?
You're not going to like my answer because I don't smoke hash. I don't go for a walk. I don't go for a walk in the woods. But we're talking about step 2?
Well, here's what's interesting. So when he said this,
go back to his question though, if you could.
Yeah, because he says digestive juices. So I'm thinking, I'm not sure.
Well, he said third stage though. He said third stage. Let's go to question 3. That's what I think he is talking about. So so what I do is I don't take a walk in the woods or anything. I move on to another copywriting project, and then at the end of the day, I sit in my living room, which I normally do with a book, but instead I probably keep the book, my finger on the page I'm on the book, put it on my lap, and sit and stare into space. That's sort of my process.
Mine's a little bit different. So so what I do is for step 2, which is the this is why I should never be driving the it does not like me today. Okay, so for digestion, what I do is I've read through everything. I've got all my notes. I've got everything together. I'm trying to put it together in this puzzle. And the mistake I've made is sometimes I get so attached to the pieces, I just start regurgitating all these facts, and it comes out really boring, and it drives my copywriting partners and mentors absolutely crazy. So now I've done this new thing for mental digestion, which is I call up somebody that I'm trying to convince of this argument, and I just try to start talking and sell it to them. So I've done all my homework. I've written all the notes. I've got all my backup materials, and then I put it all aside, and I'll call David because he's the ultimate curmudgeon, and I will try to convince him of my big idea. And I just start talking it aloud, and he kind of goes, I don't know, kind of boring, doesn't do it for me. And I get more and more passionate, and so for me, mental digestion, because I'm so verbal, has to be a verbal thing. Otherwise, I just end up writing a treatise on whatever topic I've just been researching. So that's
now one quick point. Could you go ahead to step 3 again?
Yep. And now
step 2 is mental digestion, which is active. Step 3, incubating. Basically, if you read this, it means sleep on it. And this is advice to copywriters, both staff and freelance, especially freelance. I never accept rush jobs, and step 3 is the reason. If you take on a rush job, you don't have time to do step 3. You can't say, okay, I'm going to step away for a day or 2. It's due in a day. And therefore, if you take on a rush job, you're almost guaranteeing you're not going to go through this process, and you're reducing the odds that you're going to have a big idea.
That's very well put, because that happens so many times when we write all the way up to the end. And this is a really good reminder for people who tend to be perfectionists, Bob, because they won't want to take their hands off of it, right? Like they're like, oh, I've got another day. That means I can keep tweaking it.
Right.
But really what happens is you get into that law of diminishing returns when if you actually took your hands off of it and stepped away for a day, then when you come back, you'll see it from a whole different perspective instead of just, as you said, rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. And I think that's critical to have that time. I'm a little bit different from you. I have a couple things I do. I do the trick where you keep a journal by your bed, and before you go to sleep, you write down what it is you want your unconscious to work on.
Can I interrupt? I don't keep a journal, but and my wife hates this, I always wear shirts that have pockets, and I always carry a pocket pad and a pen, always, because if an idea does come, you have to be able to capture it.
Absolutely. I think I have mine's in my purse. I don't have to wear shirts with pockets, but I have all those little bitty size ones, and I carry them all the time. And
but I don't carry a man bag. I'm not quite that effeminate, so I have to wear a shirt with a pocket.
And I will say, I know you're not a cell phone user, but I have finally figured out how to use the notes feature on my iPhone, so that if I suddenly have an idea and I don't have my pad and paper with me, I can dictate it using my little Siri feature into my notes on my phone and send it to me.
Yeah, I don't have that technology. For me, cell phones are the devil's work, but go ahead.
But other than that,
yeah.
I've also found, here I'll test your history. Wasn't it Eugene Schwartz who said that he would talk about taking a break and shaving because that would
Schwartz had a very intermittent pattern, and it's the opposite of Ted Nicholas. Schwartz said basically he would write for 33 minutes, and then a bell would go off, and he'd have to pause for, I forget if it was 3 minutes or 5 minutes to 10 minutes. Ted Nicholas, everybody's different. Ted Nicholas said you should sit down and you write until it's done, even if it takes 14 hours. So I'm sort of halfway between them. I work for longer intervals than Eugene Schwartz, but not as long as Ted, and I don't write as well as either of them, so we'll figure that out, yeah.
But you do take the break, and when you take the break at step 3, you step away completely.
Yep.
Completely. So I think we've given them some ideas on what we do to get the digestive juices flowing and what we do when we step away. I will let you know, when I step away, I sleep. Sometimes I meditate. Walking is really great for me. I think there's something about the rhythm of walking and the rhythm of language that when I step away and I'm just taking a walk in my neighborhood and I'm looking at the trees and the nature and yelling at the dog who's so old he can't keep up with me, I'm dragging him around the block, I finally will have an aha moment, which leads to our next step, the eureka moment. And I just had to throw in this 80s reference, not only because these are all the great hairstyles that I went to school with in the 80s, but because I love this movie. I don't know if you've seen this movie, Bob, Working Girl.
Oh, yeah.
But, so we were talking when Nan, who's our fabulous designer who does all the PowerPoints for me, was working on this last night. She said, oh, my God, I was reading your PowerPoint, and I just kept thinking of that scene from Working Girl, and we both, like, simultaneously screamed, Trask, radio, Trask, radio, because of the scene where she defends how she gets the idea. So for those of you who haven't seen the movie, the setup is that the Sigourney Weaver character is sort of the evil boss, and she's taking credit for an idea that Tess McGill, her secretary, comes up with, and Tess McGill is, of course, played by Melanie Griffith. And when it comes down to it, the fictional client, Owen Trask, says to Melanie Griffith, well, how did you come up with the idea? And, of course, the evil boss, played by Sigourney Weaver, can't think of it, right? So she's sort of stumbling and saying, I don't know. But the Melanie Griffith character has this great line where she says, well, I was reading the New York Post, and I saw this article about a radio station on page 1, and then I got to page 6, and that's the society page, and I saw this great picture of Erin Trask, of your daughter, at the society event, and I thought, oh, Trask, radio, radio. And it's that same moment where two completely separate things come together.
That's a great example. I never would have thought of that.
Nan gets all the credit. She was fantastic. It cracked me up. It's so true, isn't it?
Yep.
And then, of course, we have step 5, which is the cold light of day. So I called step 5 the morning after. Submit your idea to the criticism of the judicious. You will find that a good idea stimulates those who see it to add to it. Thus, possibilities in it which you have overlooked will come to light. And we have a couple questions, one in general here, Bob, about how do you do that? How do you deal with the morning after, you know?
Well, I'll tell you what I do.
Yeah, let's hear it.
But other people may, you, for example, have a writing partner, but I don't. What I do is, you know Elise Benin?
Yeah, she's fantastic. I love her.
Elise Benin is on retainer with me. Part of what she does for me is when I write a headline and a lead, I email it to her with the subject line, opinion, ? She reads everything I write, you know, the lead, the headline, and the first page, and I get a quick second reading of whether I'm on target or it doesn't make sense. That's what I do.
And I think that's absolutely brilliant. And you're right, I write in teams, so I send it to either the copy chief who's on the project, which could be Richard Armstrong or David Deutsch or Paris, and I send it to Lois, my writing partner. I also have people, I'll send it to Cassandra. She's she's also an AWAI member. She's Cassandra Lee. She's also an options trader. So if I'm writing options copy, I always send it to her and say, how does this strike you? You know, and she'll reply and say, well, I'm actually not worried about that in the market today. Here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'm worried about. Like, she gives me that, like, she is the prospect for option services, and she's got a great instinct for if I grabbed her or not. And I think this is absolutely true. It's got to go to somebody else, but the right somebody else who can really give you good feedback.
I agree with that. What was her name again?
Cassandra Lee.
So nobody doesn't like Sandra Lee? Okay, go ahead.
Cassandra used to work with Lori Haller and do some graphic design, and she's just fantastic. And both David and I have used her on numerous financial projects. She gives great feedback. Now, of course, she'll have like 5,000 emails saying,
yep.
Could you help me with this? But she's got great instincts, and I really value that, and I think we all have to throw that at the wall, and then when people come back and they go, well, I like the headline, but I don't think the subhead's quite there, or seems like you need a bigger promise here, or
I mean, this may be a little off topic, but this is my objection to the world of book self-publishing. The biggest problem with self-published books is they don't show it to anyone else. When you write a book,
there's no editor.
When you write it, yeah, you got it. When you write a book for John Wiley, you have an editor. You have to have an editor. You have to have a second reader who's a professional. And that's why so many self-published books, I'm sorry to say it, are crap.
Well, they are, because they haven't shown it to another single living soul except maybe their spouse, who, God forbid, they tell them it's crap. They're not going to say that. Not and still stay married in most cases. So the next thing that Tom asked for here was to go through some examples. So Bob and I have put together 5 quick and dirty examples of how we have each used this process in our own work. And so I want to just give you guys some of those, and then we will take a few questions from the audience if we have some time at the end. So the first one is one that I was telling Bob about when we were talking about this book, and that is this idea of doing specific and general research at the same time. So I was working on an options trading product for the old Early to Rise with Mark Ford, and at the same time my son was reading all the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. And that was when the movie had just come out, and he had asked me if we could go to the movie, and so I said that we could go, and in the middle of the movie theater, in one of the most painfully bad, let me just say, movies I've ever sat through, I had my aha moment. And I came up with this headline, Diary of a Wimpy Trader, Confessions of a Former Balls-to-the-Wall Option Trader Who Learned to Limit His Losses and Boost His Profits by Trading Like a Wimp. And again, this was a specific combination because in the research on the product and the prospect, I had found out that the guy was super conservative. He almost never lost. He risked small amounts of money. It was a safe way to learn to trade options. It was a complete opposite of, high-risk lottery ticket kinds of trading. And I was trying to do a way to make that a positive and not a negative. And so then we went on to talk about how much money he'd made by trading like this and this war chest that he'd built up. But again, to this general research of something that was in the popular culture, this idea of a wimpy kid sitting in the movie, and then combined with the specific example that I was working on, which was this trading service. And then they kind of come together in a new way. And Bob, this one I know is one that you were talking to me about.
Yeah, this is a company called Practice Builders, and they teach dentists how to build their practice. So and they're selling a seminar training. And so we could say our seminar, which you have to pay for, shows you how to build your practice 20 to 60% a month, and that would be okay, but you're selling a product. What I asked them, I said, if someone's interested, because it's an expensive training, what do you do? They said, well, we send them a brochure and a CD where we have samples of some of the phone techniques. I said, that's it. Build the headline around the CD. So instead of saying Practice Builders can help you, which is sort of self-patting yourself on the back,
right.
We know that when we start off, when we highlight the offer in our marketing, our response increases. So I use the phrase I use a lot, new free CD or new free report or new free book, whatever we're offering. New free CD reveals, which is a good word, little known, which is a good word, and then we go into it, practice building secrets is a good word, that can increase new patients 20 to 60% a month, and it was very successful for them.
This is great. I love it. You're basically combining the free lead magnet or whatever the free lead gen offer is with the primary benefit. That in-between step.
That's exactly. You combine the free offer, as you say, the lead magnet, with the primary benefit of the service. But you're not selling the service. You're basically saying, we'll tell you this for free.
Which is great, because at that point, you've completely lowered their resistance, because
totally, you got
who wouldn't want the big benefit for free, right?
Yep.
So here's my next one. You guys are going to think I never have a new idea. You're going to think all I do is steal book titles. We were talking earlier about how a book title is actually not copyrightable. Is that even a word? You can't copyright a book title.
It's not copyrightable. You cannot copyright a book title.
So this is a project I was working on with David Deutsch. It was my first control I managed to land for Boardroom, and it was for a book called The Healing Kitchen, and it was Dr. Sinatra, who is a very well-known cardiologist, and he had written this book, and what he had done, which was actually really unique and amazing, is he had worked with this chef, and they had taken each condition and all the sort of spices and vegetables and fruits and foods that worked for that condition and come up with a unique recipe. So it'd be like, a dinner and a lunch and a breakfast that all had the ingredients that were designed to help arthritis or diabetes or heart disease. And we had done all the spreads. As you know, when you work in a magalog, you're really focused on the spreads and on each two-page spread, and we had done the order. Like, I had done everything, and the copy's due in like 3 days. I've done everything, and I realized I don't have a front cover. And usually what you do is you just take one of your spreads and you test that, the headline and lead on the cover. And I had one of those. It was about how you could get rid of diabetes with beans, and it had this picture that said, which would you rather have, a cup of chili or a shot of insulin. But I wanted one that was a big idea that kind of encapsulated what the book did. And so I'm stewing about this. I'm thinking about it. David and I are emailing back and forth. I can't come up with an idea to save my soul. And then at the same time, when you talking about general versus specific, so all my specific is done. My general is that Paris and David and I have this sort of running list we keep of books, and this goes back to your idea, Bob, of people, copywriters being interested in everything, right? And we keep a list of books that are sort of written by insiders in a particular field or industry that kind of like tells you all about that, like these sort of tell-all books, And one of those on the list was Kitchen Confidential, because that's Anthony Bourdain's book about, I love the subtitle, Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. So what I did is I actually got the idea to take that and come up with a cover for my Magalog, Kitchen Confidential, the inside story of a maverick doctor who traded his scalpel for a skillet and began curing his patients' chronic health conditions with food, not pharmaceuticals. So again, the same thing of a sort of this insider and this mystery, and it became the control. And it actually beat the more direct benefit, which was, you know, beat diabetes with beans instead of insulin. So that idea of just curiosity about life, I think, is so true, Bob. Just, you know.
And forgive the bad joke, but folks, I told Marcella a true story. I also wrote a promotion for Dr. Sinatra for Philips for a potency product, and you know, which is had an intimate tone. So it began, dear fellow man, may I be frank? And I didn't think we would keep the lead, but I couldn't resist the joke, and everyone at Philips laughed and then said, take it out. So we did.
Oh, my God. I love it. Good thing you didn't break into a Sinatra tune. That would have been even better.
Yep.
And I'll just throw in as a thing, I just came across a new book on these same lines of an insider. I don't know if you've read Bob yet. It's absolutely a hysterical wild ride through the funeral, the death care industry, called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And again, nothing I ever thought I wanted to know about, but here's this hysterical memoir about like how the whole death care industry works, written by this 24-year-old who works in a funeral home. I laughed so hard I cried. And
I'll give you my headline. Don't get burned by your crematorium.
Okay. All right. I love it. Can I have that one?
You can have it.
I love it. I love it. Okay. You're up again. You've got another one here. I'm giving the B version first.
We talk about A and B level copy, and at AWAI we teach you to write what Mark IV calls A level copy. B level copy is ordinary. It's the usual stuff people write, but there's nothing compelling, there's no big idea, and it's like vanilla. Everyone does it. So this is a perfectly good letter that an insurance broker wrote. He specializes in business insurance for technology companies in California. So slash your business insurance cost by up to 30%, good benefit, get a free quote from an A-rated carriers that know your technology, all good stuff. But the beginning is, I invite you for a no-obligation opportunity to shop and quote your insurance. I've heard that before. Coverage that fits your firm, one size rarely fits all. It's good, but it's basically corporate speak. Saving you a bundle by shopping hundreds of carriers, not believable. You mean I call this guy and he's going to call hundreds of insurance companies?
Right. Nobody believes you really.
Nobody believes it. So let's go to the next slide.
Yep. She says that she's trying to get a little. There we go.
Okay. So, is this the next slide? Because we should have the other letter.
Here's the whole letter.
Yeah, here it is. So this was the rewrite, and it's based on research. What we found two things. First, the writer, me, looked online and found out that there are 6,115 insurance companies in the United States. So obviously he didn't call all of them. So I said to him, you don't call all of them. He goes, no. We did our research, and we found 15 specialize in writing insurance. So we found that there's this many insurance companies. And I said to him, you don't call everyone everything. He goes, no, I found 15. We did the research that specialize in technology companies in Southern California. And that was our letter. We said there are 6,115 insurance carriers in the United States, but only 15 of these insurance companies make it their priority to offer better coverage at lower rates to technology companies in Southern California. A very specific idea that they haven't heard before. Can you name them all or any? Most people can't, but when you call us, I will shop your insurance needs to all 15 carriers at no charge. And we went on from there.
And that's just brilliant.
Right.
And it's really so much more powerful and more believable to me, especially.
Is the next example yours or mine?
The last one is yours, and it's I think we can do it very quickly. And
and then I'm going to have to, this is pretty serious.
And that sounds good, and then we'll wrap it up.
And I'll be off for that. The male potency, we had a testosterone product that would boost your testosterone, and Don Mahoney was my copy chief. So we had two facts. Number one, which is very well known, that men after age 30 lose 1% of their testosterone every year. Then we found that one of the ingredients in the supplement was in a clinical study, reduced testosterone levels 42% in 12 days. So we were able to combine that and said, roll back 42 years of male aging in just 12 days. I have to drop off. I apologize to you guys.
So what Bob is talking about doing here, and what he and I shared on our call with each other, is that I often think of this, and I think this is very true for many of us. We think of this in the financial world, right? You know, we think, I say this a lot, and in fact, I think, Katie, I think this is in our new financial course, I can't remember, where I talk about how you have to be able to do the math. You have to be able to go through a track record and do exactly this. Look at every different combination. What's the annual return? Can you roll from one trade to the next? How much was invested in what trade? What cash did you make? You have to think of every single way that you can dimensionalize the benefit. And because Bob's an engineer, he also thinks in terms of numbers. And I think there's lots of ways to dimensionalize benefits, but remembering to think in terms of numbers is critical, and not just numbers on a financial package, but here's a men's health package, and he's taken two separate facts in his research, the idea that you're losing 1% a year in testosterone, and then the idea that this can increase it 42% in 12 days, and so you can come back with roll back 42 years of male aging, and how powerful that is. And you will find if you have the facts to back this up, you can legally make these statements. You can legally combine two studies to prove a single point. And I have to say, Bob's not here, but I have to say I was cracking up. I never thought I'd be talking male enhancement products with Bob Bly, so I thought that was that's a new for me on the call. What I want to challenge you all to do now, before we take any questions, I want to give you a little bit of a homework assignment, and then we'll see if we've got any questions before we go through, because I know we're getting close to time. And that is, I want to challenge everybody who's on the call this week to try to use this 5-step process on your next project. So I want you to start out by doing specific research, in depth and deep. I want to challenge you to broaden the depth of your reading and general life experience. Whatever those books are, follow and pursue your own natural curiosity. You know, read the New York Times cover to cover. You're going to learn all kinds of stuff each weekend that may or may not have anything to do with what you're working on. But again, it's all fodder for that kaleidoscope. The next thing is, how do you, they use the word masticate, how do you chew and digest that information? So I've given you one technique I use, which is I'm very verbal, so I talk it aloud. There's other techniques like putting it on little index cards, making charts, showing a graph, trying to do a rough draft. There's lots of ways to try to process that information. Step 3, if you'll remember, Bob and I talked about that critical step back, and I would say it has to be at least 24 hours. I think Bob is dead on when he says that you have got to give yourself a full day away from that. Now for Bob, he goes ahead and jumps and puts his mind on a new project, and that's enough for him to be separated from the one he's been working on. I like to take a walk. I like to meditate. Some people golf. Gene Schwartz used to shave. But you've got to step away from the active thinking about it. And when that happens, that's when you get surprised by that aha moment, because that's when your brain, your unconscious, not your conscious, your unconscious, has been working on that. And then we talked about step 5 is for the love of Pete, show it to somebody else. Do not be the self-published person operating in a vacuum. Any of you who are in Circle of Success, you've got people to show it to built right in there. I have a copy team that I work with. Before that, I had peers that I could show my leads back and forth with. But you have got to get that little precious baby out into the light of day, and you've got to get feedback from other individuals, not just your own sort of myopic vision on that, so that you can then see if that holds water, and you're also going to get great feedback and new tweaks on it that you hadn't thought of. I want to check in now with Katie or Kayla, or I'm not sure who's handling the questions. I've already forgotten. You could tell my brain has got a short attention span, and see if we have any questions.
Okay. This is Cameron. We do have some questions. Actually, Chuck had more of a comment earlier. In Barbara Oakley's book, A Mind for Numbers, she discusses step 3 as the transition from focused to diffuse mode of the brain. An interesting book. It explains the neuroscience behind the steps.
Can you say that title again just so everyone here can hear that?
It's Barbara Oakley's book, A Mind for Numbers.
Great, and I will add that to our reading list too. So thank you very much for that suggestion. Do we have anything else, Cameron?
We do. We have one more here. Both Edison and, I'm going to say this wrong, Edison and Salvador Dali also use these spacious diversions, sleep, to allow the subconscious to do its work. Edison used to hold ball bearings, and when they dropped, he would wake up and resume work.
Oh, I remember hearing that story. And the other one that Gene Schwartz talked about is how Mozart composed while standing at a billiard table, and he would take the billiard ball in his hand and he would throw it against the bumper and back while the other hand was writing down the musical score, which I thought was fascinating. Another way of getting out of that, what I would call that straight left brain, that pedantic brain, and accessing more of that unconscious and that creative brain. Those are both great examples. Are there any other questions? And if not, I'll forge ahead.
There are not. Forge ahead.
All right. I want to remind everybody, too, we've been trying as much as we can to collect questions ahead of time on the Facebook page. So not only do I want you to go and tell me how this 5-step process is working for you, because I really want to hear feedback on that, but I also want to encourage you to leave questions and comments and continue the conversation on the Facebook page, which is AWAI Book Club, and you can just request to join, and I'll accept your membership, and let's keep the conversation flowing. Why does my little okay. So everybody, please note there will be no Great Books Club in December. We're going to take a break for the holidays. I know it's a really busy time for everybody, so rather than trying to cram that in and tell you you have to read another book in between cooking the turkey or enjoying your family over the holidays, we're going to skip. We'll come back in January with one of my special guests, Gordon Graham, and we will be covering William Strunk & White, The Elements of Style. And Bob told me when I was talking about this that he actually wrote one of the other books in this series, which is the one on business-to-business writing. So I think that's just great. I always love when we can make just a little transition there. So we are going to read The Elements of Style. Again, it's not a very long book. I think we can all get this done after our celebrating over the holidays and be ready to come back January 15th at 3 p.m. And this is what Gordon Graham, some of you know as the white paper guy, he's just a lovely gentleman, and here's what he has to say about the elements of style. The earliest edition of the Elements of Style was first set down nearly 100 years ago. And I think you notice there's a theme here, right? We're reading a lot of the classics because this core information does not change, and there are some real gems in here. But instead of something dusty and outdated, it remains by far the most brief and practical guide to English writing that's ever appeared. Whether you write B2C, B2B, commercial copy, or even romance or mystery novels, I love that. You just can't find any more pithy advice anywhere else. Whenever I give a writing workshop, I ask who has a copy of The Elements of Style on their desk. A flurry of hands go up, and to any writer who doesn't raise their hand, I have to say, why not? Go get a copy immediately. I advise every working writer to refer to this little book often. When I'm feeling overburdened with corporate speak, buzzwords, and jargon, remembering the advice of Strunk and White really helps keep my writing crisp, clear, and concise. For less than $10 and under 100 pages, nothing else can touch this little guide as a writing advisor and companion. So I have to say Bob will still hold the record for the shortest book, but this will be the next to the shortest book. So I really think there's plenty of time you guys can get through this before our call in January. And I do think this is one of the critical books, even if you've read it before. You just can't get any better than this advice on writing. And then, Cameron, you want to introduce our January book club members, or do you want me to try to slaughter the names?
Whichever you would prefer. I'm happy to do it.
Okay, let's give it a go here. So our January book club winners, and I will apologize in advance for mispronouncing probably everybody's name on this list, but I'm going to give it the old college try, and please believe me, it is not personal at all. But we just pull these literally minutes before we do the call, so I don't have time to call you up and find out how. So we have, here's our winners who will receive a copy from Amazon.com of The Elements of Style. Tom Varjan, Amy Ojikutu, George Mulvaney, Alan Bond, Peter Kavanaugh, Mark Blanco, Greg Rabideau, close enough, I guess, Russell Green, Edith Alvarado, and Tammy Thorpe. You will be receiving your book in the mail. Congratulations. And then I want to give you a sneak peek. We have got some super fun stuff coming up next year. I cannot tell you how excited I am. We've got Anne Lamott doing Bird by Bird. She's one of my favorite writers, and this is one of my favorite books on writing. And I'm going to be covering this book with my special guest, Jen Stevens, who many of you have seen her fantastic presentations at AWAI at Book Club over many years. And the two of us are super excited to dig into Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. The March selection is Mastery, The Keys to Success and Long-Term Fulfillment by George Leonard. This is a book I read first with one of my mentors, Paris Lampropoulos, and I've also talked about with another mentor of mine, Mark Ford, and both of them highly recommend this book. And we're going to be joined by some of Paris's apprentices, current apprentices on this call to talk about coaching, how you master a new craft, how you work with mentors. I just think there will be a lot in here about that will really help folks who are trying to go from that B level to the A level. You know, what does it take to really become a master at this craft or of any challenge that you set for yourself. The April selection was suggested by the ever wonderful and brilliant Gary Bencivenga. How to Win Your Case by Jerry Spence. How to Present, Persuade, and Prevail Every Place, Every Time by a very famous trial lawyer named Jerry Spence. And I was at an event where Gary Bencivenga was speaking, the Titans of Direct Response, and Mike Palmer was there also, and we were talking over the happy hour. And I was I was asking Mike if he would be willing to come on board and be a guest for one of our calls, because I think the way he runs his copy group and his copy skills are just unbelievable. He's just a great copywriter and copy chief. And we both got excited about this book when Gary Bencivenga spoke about it. Neither one of us had read it. So we're going to do the book. Mike Palmer is going to join us, and he's going to bring on board some of the folks who are working with him at Stansberry. They're going to read that as a group, and they'll be on call with us talking about this and how they're using it in their current work. So I think we've got some really exciting books coming up, and I hope you will all join us for those. Again, I want to thank our fabulous guest, Bob Bly, for joining us and for suggesting this gem of a book I hope you all enjoyed the book. I hope you enjoyed this month's call. I know I did, and I really encourage all of you to keep us posted on how this process works for you, and let's share and keep the conversation going on our Facebook page. I'm Marcella Allison. This has been AWAI's Great Books Club call for November, and I look forward to seeing you all fresh in the new year in January with the Elements of Style.